appreciate that. We're going to go ahead and call the meeting, call the meeting to order. I'm going to go over roll call right now, so if folks can help me through that. This is Chair Zahar. I'm here, and I'll go first with folks present in person. Ms. Summers. I'm here. Mr. Conley. Ms. Lopez. Here. And I'm going to go virtual and go in order. Ms. Almanza. Mr. Hendricks. Ms. Plateau. Mr. Fong.
Here.
Thank you. Ms. Broadwater. Mr. Gorse.
Here.
Mr. Elias.
Here.
And Mr. Taylor.
Present.
And then our ex officio member, Dr. Garner. Perfect. So before we get started, we would like to call upon the land acknowledgement, and I'm hoping, Mr. Lopez, that you can lead us through that this evening.
Yes, Chair. All right. To ground yourself before starting this meeting, it's important to talk about the history of this region. Long before it came to be known as Waterloo or Austin, this region has drawn people here for thousands of years, in part because of our waterways and the wealth of natural resources. This region has been home to the Tonkawa, the Coalteca, as well as the Comanche, Lipan Apache, Sana, Humanos, and many others I may not have named who were also caretakers of this land. I highlight this history because Native and Indigenous peoples are routinely erased from the conversation, referred to as having disappeared or having been conquered. Native and Indigenous peoples are still here and present in what we now call Austin. The pursuit of white land ownership, profit, and so-called progress has harmed Black, Indigenous, and people of color in this city. The effects of the legacy of settler colonialism, the theft of land, slavery, and genocide are still felt and present with us today. It's vital to keep this history in mind as you do this important work and make a commitment to stop perpetuating the cycle of violence against Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lopez. I really appreciate that. So we're going to go over to public comment. Do we have anyone already signed up?
So we haven't received an email with signups. I do see that there are attendees in the audience, and you should be able to raise your hand if you would like to speak. And if you do, then we can open your mic and you're welcome to participate in public comment.
So again, we'll give a few minutes. If somebody who is an attendee in the virtual space, if you would like to speak, please raise your hand. Okay, I think we're going to move on to our next item, which is the approval of our April 13th, May 4th, and May 11th meeting minutes. And I just want to confirm with Mr. Lopez that that is correct. We're going over the April 13th, May 4th, and May 11th minutes. Is that correct, Mr. Lopez?
Yes, sir, Chair.
I appreciate those. And I know those have been circulated in advance. Is there anyone who has any corrections or comments on the minutes? If not, do I have a motion to approve our minutes?
So moved. Second.
Thank you. So we have a motion to approve our April 13th, May 4th, and May 11th meeting minutes. Motion made by committee member Summers, seconded by Ms. Lopez. All in favor, either raise your hand or say aye.
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 Thank you all. That passes unanimously for all members present. So if folks don't mind, I would like to move around some of our items this evening because we're trying to accommodate staff schedules. Would anybody have any concerns if we went ahead and did staff updates first, followed by the light rail update, and then going to the community engagement? I'm not seeing concern, so we'll start with staff updates first. And we can certainly circle back on that if other staff joins us at a later time.
Okay.
Okay.
First, staff update is from the Austin Transit Partnership. For those who are not aware, my name is Brandon Carr. I'm the Senior Vice President of Legal Services and General Counsel for Austin Transit Partnership. I'm going to try to speak slowly for the interpreter. Just as a little bit of background, next slide, please.
1 sec to catch up with you. There we go.
Okay. Just as a little bit of background, the Texas legislative session is invoked every odd year, so every other year. Right now, this was the 88th Texas legislative session that began on January 10th. The last day of the regular session was Monday, May 29th, 2023. However, you should be aware that the governor has the authority to call an unlimited number of 30-day special sessions. For each of those special sessions, the governor has to issue a proclamation about what the subject matter is. And we've had one special session called so far, and that was for property taxes and the US-Mexico border. ATP does have a lobbyist and does work with lobbyists, including Delisa Communications, to advocate on behalf of the organization. So we do have professional help down there. Next slide, please. If you're not familiar with the, I skipped one. There you go. If you're not familiar with the Texas legislative process, the way it works is that in either the House or Senate, a bill is filed, and let's say in this instance, it's the Senate. It's usually called the Senate bill or SB, and then it has a number that it's assigned, and it is assigned to a committee. And that committee usually has certain subject matters such as environmental issues or local government issues or border security, whatever it may be, and they will take up that bill. And sometimes they'll have a public hearing on that bill. If the bill is successful, then it will make it out of committee through a vote, and then it will go to the calendars committee. So if it started in the Senate, it would go to the Senate calendars committee. And then the Senate calendars committee would schedule that bill for a House vote, for a vote on the full floor of the Senate. As you're probably aware, thousands of bills get filed every year. The legislative session is pretty short, so it's really critical for the bill to actually make it to the floor that it has a lot of support. Once the bill passes, either the House or the Senate, it goes to the other body, and then it goes to that committee process, the scheduling process, and then the full process of voting for the whole floor. If a bill passes both chambers, the House and the Senate, then it's sent to the governor for signature or automatic passage after 10 days. So if the governor doesn't sign, the bill automatically goes into effect after 10 days. The governor has time to veto any bill that he would like to within that 10-day period. I think so far only one bill has been vetoed. Next slide, please. If a bill receives more than 2/3 approval, then it automatically becomes effective upon the governor's signature, which can sometimes throw cities, counties in for a loop or a whirlwind. If something is automatically effective June 1st and they didn't have time to prepare for it. But generally, most bills are effective September 1st of the year that it's adopted. So this year, most bills will be effective September 1st, 2023. Just a little bit of extra nuance. If you're ever curious about what happens if there are differences between bills in the House and the Senate, what they do is they send some of their representatives to a committee, a conference committee, and they'll try to hash out any negotiation. And if that negotiation is successful, it will go back to each body for approval and then to be sent to the governor. And that's going to be important on the next bill that we're going to talk about. So the first bill, and I only have three really that I think are affecting Austin Transit Partnership that I know of at this time. The first one is House Bill or HB 3899. This bill, as you probably heard, would require or was created in order to enact conditions for the issuance of bonds by local government corporations. It was directed at ATP expressly. This bill would have required ATP to hold an election to issue bonds or debt. in accordance with chapter 1251 of the government code, even though Proposition A in 2020 already provides ATP with local funding. So this bill actually passed the House and passed the Senate. However, while the Senate was considering moving the bill forward, and the Texas Attorney General opinion came out that was contrary to the bill. And so the Senate amended their version of the bill, which means it didn't match up with the House bill, and there wasn't time to negotiate a compromise. So it died on a point of order. Essentially, the Senate bill said that you can't do what the House bill said. So those bills were not compatible anymore. And so the bill died. Next slide, please. Senate Bill 1984, you may not have heard about this one because it didn't make it very far. But this bill would have greatly expanded ATP's ability to enter public-private partnerships for construction of light rail. Next slide, please. And the final bill, which you may or may not have heard of, is sort of a global preemption bill. It's a state preemption of certain city and county regulations, including agriculture code, finance code, insurance code, labor code, natural resources code, and occupations code. And yes, it is sometimes called the Death Star bill because it does have a dramatic effect on what cities and counties can or cannot regulate. The reason this is important is because, as you may recall, in the Joint Powers Agreement, there were provisions related to workforce and equity policies. So we're looking to see whether this bill preempts and prohibits us from enacting or whether we can tweak some of those requirements in the Joint Powers Agreement in order to fulfill those workforce and equity policies. We're still doing a legal analysis right now. We don't quite know how this will be interpreted. I think cities and counties all over the state are in a similar position. So that's all I have for the legislative update. Are there any questions?
Open it up to questions. Or comments. I'll just make a quick comment that I'm glad that staff is working to look at some of those labor provisions, the Joint Powers Agreement. I know that was something that our governance working group had worked hard on, and something that was sort of like hard won. So yeah, it would be great to see whatever it is that we can do to ensure that we can move forward with that. Yes, Ms.
In addition, we're also going to look at what the legal outcomes of that analysis are, but also what can we build into the contract structures themselves, which would be a separate topic. So we'll see how we move that forward as well.
I really appreciate that. Thank you.
So,
Okay, we can go on to other staff updates. So was there any other update from the Austin Transit Partnership? I think most of them will be covered in our presentations.
That's correct.
Um,
Marla had one though.
oh. Mr. Ado, you had an update from the city team?
Yes, I do. I do have a presentation. I don't know if Lonnie has it.
I do. Give me one
Okay.
second. So
Perfect. Okay.
See, I just need to first get it on screen here and then I can share it with everyone else. So. Here we go. Can you see it now?
Yes. All right, perfect. So good afternoon. I'm here to provide a brief update on the community initiated solutions programs and where we are now with the different contracts. So if you can go to the next slide. Yes. So as you all know, at the end of September of 2022, the Austin Housing Finance Corporation was able to approve the funds to be awarded for the 14 community organizations to conduct displacement prevention work along the 1 mile buffer of Project Connect lines and stations for the 3 priority areas that have been defined for the first round of funding, which were renter, tenant stabilization, expansion and preservation of home ownership opportunities, and then other anti-displacement strategies. So as an update for you all, and just so you all know, right now, as to date, we have 5 contracts that have been currently signed. We have 3 more that are expected to be signed within the next week. And then we're working with the rest of the 6 organizations to get them to a point where there will be like.
Mr.
on the
Lu, could I ask you to
Yep.
slow down a little? I'm sorry, just
Oh.
for interpreters.
I'm so sorry. Yes, I can definitely slow down. So as an update on all of the organizations and where they're at in terms of the pipeline. So currently we have 5 organizations that their contracts have been signed already. 3 more organizations that are expected their contracts to be signed by the end of next week. And then the following 6 organizations, we're just working very closely with them to get them to the point that their contracts can be signed, hopefully very soon, within the next month or so. An announcement about the start of the programs and everything kind of as a celebration is expected in July. And so in the next few slides, I'm going to talk a little bit about an overview of the programs by the 3 priorities that we have set here for the first round of funding. The next slide, please. Perfect. So the organizations that you see here are the organizations that are going to be focusing on that tenant renter stabilization. And then the work kind of cumulatively, so I'm kind of giving like a higher level overview, includes programs around rental and utility assistance, programs that stabilize families through financial aid, long-term case management, financial literacy, education, and wraparound services. So if you go to the next slide, you will see this specific, oh, no, that's the previous one was good. Yep. You'll see the square around these 2 specific organizations, and we just wanted to highlight those out because their work, especially for the Workers' Defense Project and BASTA, they'll be working with community to develop community benefit agreements with developers, and the Austin Tenant Council will work on supporting tenants through counseling and connecting to different services. So it's a little bit more specific than the other kind of a broader overview that I just shared that the other organizations that you see here will be conducting. So the next slide. The next slide shows you the organizations that will be working on homeownership expansion focus area. So basically this work will be assisting homeowners with financial education, including delinquent property taxes, foreclosure prevention counseling, mortgage relief, estate planning, refinancing and home repair options, and other generational asset building. And then if we go to the next slide, you will see kind of that other category that we had, which is basically kind of looking at economic mobility. And so in this specific case, Goodwill workforce programs will be providing job training and occupational skills training credentials for living wage positions. Life and You is going to be supporting property owners from being displaced in terms of title issues and other issues. And then your last one is going to be providing financial education for grades 6 to 12. Which is the Interfaith Action of Central Texas. If you go to the next slide, I think that's kind of all of the big overview that we have. We'll be happy to, if desired, kind of come in maybe next month or whenever you guys want to kind of go on a deeper dive, but that's kind of like a big overview of what's going on with the programs, the contracts, but also the services that will be provided.
Thank you, Mr. Adhan. Before I open up to questions and comments, I do want to mention this is on sort of like a future agenda item list for us. So once all the contracts have been completed, likely let's say in August, so July they get all completed and we get to do our celebration, we'll have a more in-depth presentation from our staff. But yeah, I'll open it up to questions or comments from any of our committee members. Okay, I appreciate that. Do we have any staff updates from our CapMetro team?
The only update they have right now is the CAC bylaws change, which will go into the other agenda item.
Perfect. I appreciate that very much. Okay, well, we're gonna wrap up this item and move to our discussion items for the day. And the first one that we're going to start with is the Austin Light Trail update. And I'm hoping that we can have a conversation on the joint partnership outcomes and other conversations. Yes, so could take your time.
I'm so good at this.
And while we're setting that up, I do want to acknowledge we're joined by board chair of the Austin Transit Partnership, Chair Castro de Pereira, who has been very diligently joining in and listening to the Community Advisory Committee. So big thank you for that. And I know she and the board have done so much heavy lifting on the Austin Light Trail. So I wonder if you want to say a few comments before our staff digs into details of the conversation at the joint party meeting.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I want to first say thank you to all of you for the very heavy lift. You guys really did the incredible amount of work in getting us to where we arrived yesterday at council. Was it yesterday? Tuesday. The days are blending. So thank you everyone for all the amazing work that you did. And I'm especially grateful because I do believe that the at grade recommendation is the right solution for this community at this point in time. And I think I hope that you see the work and the influence that you all had, specifically with accessibility issues and making it the most accessible system by having it at grade, because I know that took a lot of negotiations and education and make it data driven with CapMetro as well. So the fact that all three partners embraced an alignment, a vision, it's remarkable. And I think really the staff and how everybody really worked together and had some difficult conversations, I hope really marks a turning point for the trust and the ability for us to really move forward, holding each other not only accountable, but holding each other's hands. So I'm really proud of all the work that everyone has done. And when I read all the community feedback that came through and the summary of comments, I was very impressed about the salient points really revolved around very unique buckets, but they were very consistent. So I think it's also speaks of the design alignments, the recommendation that we all landed on really reflects what the community wanted. And I think that is something for everyone in this group and everyone of all the three organizations to feel very proud of, because I do think that it shows that we're not only listened, but that we had diverse options out there for people to have meaningful conversations around. And lastly, I really want to commend us for having the courage to highlight that this should serve the communities that most need it. And our communities that have really been hoping for more effective and efficient transit. So we have still our work cut out for us, but I hope that we have now really solid foundation from which to build. And I'm here to answer any questions from anyone. If y'all have any extra, anything you'd like to say.
Thank you so much, Chair. Would anybody like to share anything with the chair? I think just to say thank you so much to you and all the board members and the board members of CapMetro and city council members for your leadership on this issue and for engaging with the community advisory committee, but also the community at large in an in-depth way. So a big thank you and acknowledgement of the effort that you all have put in as well.
No, thank you.
No, I'll also say, add my 2 cents, and I'll say I think we've all been through quite a journey together over these past first 2 years of the project, and this has often been a space where we've been able to have critical frank, challenging conversations. And I'm grateful that this has been that kind of a space, and I'm also happy that we've reached something that, even if it wasn't first choice of everybody, it was a choice that everybody feels is worth defending and fighting for. And I'm glad that we can all unite around this project. So happy to see it move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Conley. Okay, we'll move into our staff presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
I think I did it. See if this works. Jen's gonna take over the first action item.
Did we want to adjust the order?
We're all ready.
We're good to go.
Action. I'm making sure I'm good to go. See, Molly?
Unless, Brandon, do you want?
Do you want me to go to yours first?
No, I think it makes sense to go.
Okay. In case you didn't hear, the application plan was adopted, and we just, heard, some great comments about that. So, and I just want to express my gratitude to the CAC as well for all the work you put in and all the thoughtfulness, along the way. So it is a real challenge to get here, but as it was adopted by all three bodies, and kind of culminating in the meeting on Tuesday. So I wasn't going to actually dwell on this map too much because I feel like we've talked about it, but more talk about what's next. And the big what's next is the environmental review process. So we were, the meeting with the joint partnership occurred on Tuesday afternoon, and we were on the phone with FTA at 9 a.m. the following morning, and they were all 100% aware of what was going on. They are watching all of the meetings that are available to, via streaming, and they knew exactly what was going on. So what is going on? We're speaking to them about some of the mechanics of the NEPA process and how we proceed. As you know, we had initiated the NEPA process. We're still in it. We actually initiated it in 2021 for the orange line and the blue line. But now we're here, with Austin Light Rail. And so.
Can we slow down?
Oh, yes, sorry. So, we will be working with FTA through some of the details of making that adjustment and the proper notifications. And so that'll be ongoing for a little bit. Really, the first big task is actually the preliminary engineering. And bringing all of the engineering associated with this project up to the same level and a level appropriate to do the environmental review. And that will take several months, and is starting now as well. So the actual analysis, the environmental analysis, probably will be happening in earnest starting this fall, based on that design work after it's been advanced. And some of the big milestones to look forward to will be, it takes some time to actually conduct all the analysis and develop all the documentation for it. So we are expecting a draft environmental impact statement to be issued for public review and comment, probably early summer of 2024. One of the tasks we're also initiating is what is the community engagement process all along the way, before then, as well as during the public review of the draft EIS. So after that public comment period, comments are received, there is a resolution and disposition response to all the comments, and ultimately a final environmental impact statement will be prepared. And that's the basis for the FTA to issue a record of decision, which is the conclusion of the NEPA process. And it's actually a real important milestone for us in the process, because you can sort of accomplish certain things after the ROD that we can't now. For example, like acquiring right of way, doing utility relocations, some of the activities related to vehicle procurement. So that ROD NEPA milestone is a big one. We're still working on the schedule. At this moment, we're anticipating a ROD in the spring of 2025. So it is a lengthy process. Let me pause there for a minute to see if there are any questions or trying to redirect my topic.
Yeah, I would just want to request that, the communication be worded pretty thoughtfully. Someone had sent me, and I'm actually not even sure where it was from, if it was like a Statesman article or if it was an ATP site, but it said, design will begin for Austin Light Rail. And they were like, it's just beginning. And I was like, no, a lot has been done and will be used, we're not starting over. And so I think that messages to the community need to be really clear that although we have a new decision and we're going to need to adjust and put it all together and make sure all the segments are at the same level before we finish the environmental study and go into funding and construction. We need to be clear that all the work that was done prior does not necessarily need to be thrown out and we're starting over.
Absolutely.
And I think there has been a little confusion on that, just from some people that have reached out to me. So I think that just be really thoughtful with the way that that is communicated.
Okay, no, thank you. That's good to know. And you're absolutely right. I mean, the orange line and blue line were taken to like almost 30% design points. And a lot of that is still usable, if you will. It's the parts where the design is changed where we need to, bring it up to where it needs to be for the environment. Yeah, but you're right. There's a lot of work that we're building upon.
Other questions and comments? I'll make a comment. Oh,
I
go
have
ahead,
a
Chair.
quick question.
Yes.
This is for Jen. Jen, I'm curious if the DEIS, is it going to also include the priority extensions area?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And that is something that we're talking about with FTA. And so we're kind of working through with them, what the priority extensions are, which, at this moment they're unfunded. But we know that there's interest and work ongoing to identify additional funding. So the advantages of including the priority extensions in the EIS at this time are that you'll be ready, if funding comes through in a year, we're ready to include it as part of the phase 1 project. The disadvantage to doing it is that since it is unfunded, you could spend time, effort, money on doing that analysis, and then there is a shelf life for a NEPA decision. If it takes, I don't know, maybe probably on the order of 5+ years after the ROD to actually identify the funding and be ready to go, you'd have to redo it all. So, I mean, that's the risk of it. And the good news is, again, those priority extensions were part of the projects previously. So we do have a lot of design work and we have a lot of analysis completed. So we're kind of going through that discussion with FTA right now.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate that. Any other questions or comments? I was just going to make a one comment, which is, of course, as we go through this process of NEPA and the EIS sort of finalization, just a reminder to the committee that, the committee will be engaged in that really deeply. We will be part of that conversation with our partners at the ATP. And I know that is a specific commitment that I know I can say personally, but I think definitely we are all part of it. We have made to the Mentopolis community and working with them on these items. We want to make sure that some of the issues that they had raised and we had worked on, are part of these conversations. So we'll definitely be working on that with them. And I would also say that I think as we proceed with this element forward, to your point, there's a lot of ways in which we have all engaged in the past, and we'll keep on building on that. Like Ms. Summers, you're reminding us, just be very clear in saying sort of just the next step in the process, not necessarily that we're starting from scratch. Okay, I think we can move on at this point.
So the next, so we had 3 total items on the agenda between the parties on Tuesday. The first one, as Jen mentioned, was ATP adopting the Austin Light Rail implementation plan because the city and CapMetro had done it the week prior. So ATP needed to follow up and do the same thing. The second item was regarding the joint powers agreement. We identified changes that needed to be made in order to implement the Austin Light Rail implementation plan. So as a highlight of what changed, one thing we sought to do was clarify the roles and responsibilities with regard to the Austin Light Rail implementation plan. And the way we did that is we added language that ATP will serve as the federal grant recipient and sponsor under the National Environmental Policy Act for Austin Light Rail with city and CapMetro support. And CapMetro would continue to be the NEPA or National Environmental Policy Act sponsor and the grant recipient for the bus, park and rides, the pickup, et cetera, that they're currently doing anyway. We also added language regarding ATP owning the plans and specifications for the Austin Light Rail. We added clarification that any ATP local funding is subject to budgetary process of the city and annual appropriation. That was something that was identified by the Texas Attorney General. We also identified that future agreements related to either the CapMetro components or the Austin Light Rail will be done through separate implementation agreements. So for the operations of the light rail, we'll have to have a separate agreement. From the agreements that I've seen from other agencies, they're pretty long and pretty extensive. And so I'm happy to give you a chance to look at that too, if that's something that the CAC would be interested in the future looking at. We also added a provision for ATP and CapMetro to work together on long-term planning for financing components where ATP will provide reimbursement. That's especially important knowing that the light rail is now around 10 miles versus what was originally envisioned. So we need to also do the same for the CapMetro components to see how that fits under the budget also. And finally, we added a decision-making framework for any sort of disagreements between the parties, where and how it's elevated up the chain so that we can resolve any issues quickly and efficiently. And that's pretty much the high-level highlights. Any questions about the supplement?
Thank you, Mr. Carter. Do you have any questions or comments? I will just say a big thank you to staff and all of our decision makers. I know this was something that our governance working group had raised last year. Some of the roles and responsibilities work on streamlining that, essentially just to make us be ready for implementation. So it's very exciting that we're more and more really moving towards how do we make this make us rapid implementation possible. And the other thing, I'm also very excited to see that, there have been some concerns about what the Attorney General had presented. We've resolved those issues and are moving past them to make sure that we're compliant with all legal frameworks. And it's very exciting to know that, yes, we're, fully compliant and on track. So that's definitely great. And I appreciate everyone's work on that.
All right, I will talk about action item 3. Brandon can head out. And so that is the approval of an amendment to community advisory committee bylaws. If you weren't aware, your terms were coming to an end at the end of this month. And we needed a little bit of time to figure out what that means and how we move forward. And so that approval of that amendment was essentially a holdover provision. So everyone's terms can extend through December, I believe. That gives us a little bit of time to do a review of the governing structures, the bylaws, and also reappointments or appointments of CAC members. And so I'm here representing all 3 parties. City of Boston, PCO office, Project Connect office could not be here, and CapMetro, just to show the collaboration we're having in order to come to a recommendation. We're going to work this summer to pull together that recommendation as a whole, including things that we see are challenges from the CAC perspective that we've watched happen over the past couple of years, potentially staggering terms, looking at any other concerns that you've had and shared with us over time, even in the application process itself. We're going to review all of it. come back early fall with recommendations and to present to you all for consideration and then move forward from there. So that is our goal. That is what we're going to do. In addition, if anyone on the CAC currently is not interested in continuing, please let one of our staff members know so that we know how many positions we're going to be seeking.
Any questions or comments on that? And I'll underscore that last point. So just so folks understand, we currently all our terms have been extended to December. So until December, we're all going to stay in our positions while the process is being set out for the next sort of set of appointments. If within this 6 months you are planning to step off or feel like you cannot serve, please let staff know and please let me know as well so we can make sort of accommodations. My hope would be that we can all continue serving at the end of this year, but also understand that circumstances change. So we want to be responsive to that. I also want to point something else to this, which is, this is something that's been going on for a while as a conversation. Staff will be working through, as we said, multiple different things, staggered terms, appointment process, and so on. I think our governance working group may provide sort of some feedback, but I just want to be very clear that I think the CSC will likely not be making a recommendation or engaging very deeply in this item. In some ways, it seems a little odd for us to give recommendations on how to appoint us. So we're going to step out of that process and let the folks who are doing the work do the work. Of course, I think we have some insight on appointment process and things like that, and we'll definitely share our personal experiences with staff so that it can inform them.
I wonder if, as I hear that it's odd for us to provide recommendations on what might be our own appointments. However, I do think that the community advisory committee is such a critical equity component of this project, and how it is appointed and the transparency with which the process of appointment takes place is so important. I just wonder, and I hear that there's a conflict, and I don't want us to do something that we're conflicted out of. I'm almost tempted to resign from my seat on the CAC just so that we can fix the appointment process. And I wonder if we can at least hear from community on how it, as the CAC, I think we should be able to have an open meeting and hear from the community on how it thinks the CAC appointment process should go. And we should be able to compile that report from the community and submit it or something along those lines.
I think that is a good idea and something we can work on for sure with staff to make sure that we have a community conversation. Just so folks know, I think there's been some conversations that are just starting out with the City of Boston's equity office, and they're helping us sort of pick through the equity concerns about how appointments are made. I would also say, I think we would all still be sharing our own experiences and a little bit about what we would want. I just don't think we will be making any formal recommendations. We will not be voting on a memo or anything like that. But I think we'll sort of be in conversation with staff. And I would also say, having gone through the appointment process, I'm going to assume we all have personal reflections on what worked for us and what didn't. And that's hopefully something that we can share with staff as well. So we'll make sure that we are able to voice our opinions, that we're able to sort of bring together maybe some community voices. I appreciate that comment. But yeah, we would not be making a formal recommendation on this. And I should really be clear that that idea that we should not make a formal recommendation is truly coming from me. I want to be very clear. That is not something our staff asked. That is something I as chair thought made sense. So our staff has honestly been very inclusive of keeping us in this conversation.
I do like the idea of community input.
I agree. I think that's a very good idea.
Influencing the-
Other questions or comments that folks might have? And with a caveat that I know it feels like we have 6 months, but they're going to go by really fast. So we're going to have to work on a lot of things really quickly. And I hear Mr. Huang saying that he is giving a thumbs up to community input as well. Okay, do we have any other item on the joint partnership or project update, or do we want to move to the community engagement?
That is all we have on that.
I have a
Okay.
question, and I'm not sure if it might have should have been asked under staff updates, and I'm sorry about that, which is the open spot on the ATP board. I didn't know if there's any news about that.
So what I know, and staff can correct me if I'm wrong, the applications have closed, and there's a nominating committee that will be meeting to go through the applications and interview and do things like that. And I don't know what the status of that is, but we had made some recommendations around transparency, and I believe staff will be working to make sure that those are followed in terms of posting the different sort of things that have to be posted publicly.
So we will follow up on that.
And just, sorry, go ahead. Yes, Chair.
Great on that, because I do believe that's a great question, and that the 3 applicants have been posted, that of the ones that submitted an application. Is that correct? Because I did read a memo of the 3 applicants with their backgrounds that were forwarded over. I believe that have been published on ATP's website. So let me double check to make sure, because that was one of the transparency pieces that was asked of us to make sure that the community has they know who they are at least 2 weeks before they get appointed, and or who's the final recommendation. So all that, Rebecca Giello sent a really good memo with all of the details and the schedule and the sequence of how things are moving forward.
It's posted on the website. It was a June 2nd.
Yes.
You want additional stuff with making sure it gets emailed out to the CAC members as well.
Appreciate that. So I'm hearing that we'll have that memo shared out with the CSC members. So we'll have more details on that. And the rough estimated timeline that has been shared with us is that the appointment will be made by next month. With that person stepping in, I believe, in the August meeting.
Yes, that's correct. And I did have another recommendation regarding the appointment of CAC members, because this is connected back to the idea about involving more of the youth. With the CAC, I met during the Austin Downtown Alliance State of Downtown celebration that they held downtown. I ran into Joanna Ortiz, who's the president and CEO of the Austin Young Chamber, and presented the idea of collaborating with you guys. The Chamber of Commerce for it's called the Austin Young Chamber. And I think that could also be a really neat connection of bridging the young business community and bringing more diversity. But I was just looking at their website, and I believe Joanna is stepping down and they have appointed an interim. So now I feel like I have to start over. So, but just planting the seed. If y'all are thinking of working with the Austin Young Chamber, I think that would be a fun collaboration.
I appreciate that, Chair, and I think that is a good point, because we have received public testimony on ensuring that we have more youth representation and young folks involved as well. So that's a good point. We'll make sure that that's part of the conversation.
What was that called again? Austin Youth?
The Austin Young Chamber.
Young Chamber?
I feel like it's a youth chamber. I guess it's a young chamber, isn't it? Yeah, it's the Austin Young Chamber.
Young Chamber.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Mike Gorse has his.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Gorse. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just had a question. This discussion made me realize that I don't actually know what the procedure is entirely for us being appointed. So I wonder if it's documented somewhere. Like, I know that the Access Advisory Committee has a slot. That's how I was appointed. Like CSAC also has a slot, I believe. UTC has a slot. So I know that, but I don't, as far as other people, I don't know how they're appointed.
I
So
think
it's
that
hard
is
to know
actually,
what should or shouldn't be changed, given that.
that makes sense, Mr. Gorse, and maybe that's something we can have our staff share as well. Just, that is a good point. Thank you for reminding us. When we're talking about appointments, we're actually talking about sort of the 8 community at large seats and our ex officio seat. But the way it's set up, there's 5 appointments that happen with the bodies, and the bodies make that decision. And that's your right access, Customer Satisfaction Advisory Committee at CapMetro, and then the Mayor's Task Force on Persons with Disabilities, Urban Transportation Commission, and Community Development Commission. All 3 from the City of Austin make recommendations as well. And so I think these are all good conversations to have. How does that process work? How do these 8 at-large seats work? How the ex officio is considered as well. So I think these are all good points, and we'll make sure that staff shares some information so people have context on what the current process is. And I'll make sure that the governance working group, which currently is formed of myself, committee member Conley, committee member Hendricks, and committee member Fong are involved in this conversation. If other folks are interested and would like to be involved, you're more than welcome to let me know. We'll make sure you're added to those conversations as well. We have capacity to add 2 more people to that committee. Okay, so we're going to move to our next item. But before I do, I think I was hearing Michelle, do you want to walk us through or help folks understand how to find that memo from staff regarding the board appointment? Or
Yeah, I can do that, and I can put it up on the screen, so I can do that. I did put direct links in the chat, so you should be able to see where to get to. Let me now get back to Zoom and.
Yeah, I just want to make sure if somebody's watching the recording later, anything.
Yes,
capture it.
exactly. So I'm going to share my screen here and I'll walk through how to find it. So if you're on the main page of the website, you can go over to leadership and you can see at the top right-hand side, there's a board of directors vacancy item, and I clicked on there to learn more. And that took me to the board vacancy information. And if you slide down the page, you'll see that memo that was referenced, the June 2nd memo. I'm going to open it in another tab just so we don't lose this page. And it walks through the 3 candidates as well as their application materials with some personal information redacted. So you can slide through and take a look at all of that. And you can see the 3 applicants here and then their applications. And so again, if you're at ATP, you click on the leadership tab. Then on the board vacancy information, and if you slide down towards the bottom of the page, you'll find that memo about applicant information down here, and I put the direct links in the chat.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Very helpful. And I guess as we wrap up this item, I just want to say our design committee will be engaging in the design work as it moves forward. Governance committee will be engaging in the governance work as it moves forward. And I just want to end up by saying thank you again to all of our CLC members. I think we should be very proud because what has finally been adopted is very close to, I think, the work that we've been doing for quite a long while. So a big thank you to our staff teams, honestly, and a big thank you to the leadership, but thank you to all of you for working on this. Which takes us to a slightly late full conversation, but looking at the community engagement work, and Ms. Chavez will be walking us through that. Again, reminder, this engagement was done in advance of all of that work at the joint parties, making a decision, and was shared with those parties. We were given a snippet last time, but because of the way our meetings were scheduled, we could not give a full presentation on what staff had brought forward. So this is a space for us to sort of look at what was shared, but also give feedback, advice on how do we sort of go forward, knowing that I think it was a great process this time. Go ahead, Ms. Chavez.
Thank you. And I do have a habit of speaking fast, so please tell me to slow down. That was a great entry because I know we have talked about community engagement in this report, at least leading up to it quite a bit. Hoping you all have read the report and have feedback for us as we go forward, but I'm really starting with the conclusion first, which is where we ended up in the report and then where we're already seeing that we want to move forward and improve upon. So I'm using the report itself. I am not walking through every page of this report. It's a very lengthy one. I pulled out some key high level concepts, but anything that I'm not addressing directly, please feel free to ask the questions as we keep going. But as we saw in the feedback, taking a step back, in order to evaluate all the comments that came through, we had a team set aside whose job was only to review and code comments. So while ATP, CapMetro, and City of Austin staff was out doing the engagement work, there was a team receiving all of the comments in order to stay on top of it, doing weekly report outs so that we could make sure that we maintain the timeline that was set to achieve the final conclusions that we reached. the way that the comments were structured and how we were evaluating them was really to connect them back to our community values criteria. So we went into this saying this is not a vote and it's not a tally. We need to understand preferences of what you're looking for in the first phase of light rail in order to help us decide what that option is. When we did the final analysis through the coding process, reviewing each of those comments, you see that the results that the highest, most frequent comments related to community values criteria was mobility and customer service experience. Sorry. So that includes ridership. Ridership is a key metric. It was the most commonly commented on theme. Connectivity, making sure that we are integrated with the full network, both current and future lines, including bike and ped. And then concerns and questions around traffic, that as we're building it out, we need to make sure that we're managing congestion and that we're creating reliable commutes. Second to that was access to opportunities. And that is making sure we're reaching key destinations and primarily schools, medical centers, job centers. Downtown was a frequently commented on location, as well as the airport. So airport was a big topic. Questions came up in our last meeting about whether there was a difference between a larger group of comments and if we were to disaggregate based on community characteristics. We actually didn't find very many differences. Airport was still frequently commented on as a key destination point. When we looked at current transit riders, it was the same for individuals who identified as low-income participants in our comment blocks. The only difference, anyone who identified as Black and Indigenous person of color, they were more split. Some said, yes, we should make it to the airport in the first phase, while others said not in the first phase. So it was pretty standard across, no real differentiation. How did we do it? So we actually started back in December of 2022. So I don't know if everyone remembers the focus groups. So we are talking all the time about that 6-week process, but really that time frame from November through January was how we developed the community values criteria and validate it with our priority populations. We had determined previously that we had some gaps in our engagement. Youth 18 to 24, Spanish-speaking communities, Black and Latino communities, people with disabilities, and then low income. And so we focused very hard for the focus group timeframe to hit that population. From those results, you could see access to opportunities was still a top criteria, affordability benefits, making sure that we're serving people who need the service, connectivity, and traffic. So the themes really correlated as we continue through the larger process. Moving into the 6-week period, we had to marry the community values criteria that were created during that time frame, along with our guiding principles. So going into the process, we knew that if we had only relied on virtual open house comments and not proactive engagement, we would have been skewed in the information received. And so pulling the community values criteria with our guiding principles of how we're going to conduct that engagement led to how we developed our comments analysis. So I'm going to try to go through this sort of slowly. You know that the 6-week engagement launched on March 21st at the library. We had over 500 people in attendance, and that does not include staff. So that is true attendance at the event. We launched the virtual open house the same day. And over that 6-week period, you see that we had over 19,000 views of that open house with over 2,000 participants and more than 5,000 comments received in that forum. And that includes both the English and Spanish. We did bus stop outreach. You know, a key aspect of this was to ensure that we were reaching current transit riders. And so the at-stop outreach was key to that at both bus stop and train stop locations where there was high ridership. We were able to connect with nearly 3,500 people during that time at 45 different unique stops. So be aware that at each of those stops, while we are sharing the virtual open house links and we're encouraging people to submit comments, we were also collecting comments. So if people shared a question with us or gave us feedback about anything, even if it wasn't related to the option specific, we made sure that we collected that and shared it. In addition, we did do over 90 meetings and events. So that's quite a bit. And I still believe I'm undercounting. There are several follow-up conversations that happen that will be very challenging for me to track. Those are phone calls that happened, additional meetings where an organization would call with a list of questions and I'd have staff step up to answer them. The hundreds of emails that came in that we made sure to answer every single one that we received. And even a few more meetings that I think people had and didn't actually tell me they had. But I collected the notes. That includes, so when I say 90 plus meetings, so that's the qualitative meetings where we're sitting in a room having a presentation, actually having dialogue with people. And that would be any number. So we didn't mind if there was only 2 people in the room, or there was 100 people in the room. We would take the meeting, sit down, have that conversation. It also included events. So we wanted to be in places where individuals who aren't going to show up to those meetings, but are present, that we could make sure that we were doing a lot of work to at least try to access and make those connections. In addition, and what we don't talk about a lot is our media push. So we ensured that we were pushing all of this information through Spanish language media as much as we could, as well as English. And then we did a pretty extensive tour of boards, commissions, and committees. And so spent a lot of time over at City Hall talking to all the different commissions and committees, all the quality of life commissions that we could reach, as well as the ATP and CapMetro committees. So to give you an idea, and why I'm showing this map is because I'm also going to show you the virtual open house demographics next, and then talk about some lessons learned and where we want to head. So this gives you an idea of all the locations we were at during that 6-week time frame, which was all over Austin, extensively doing work. So the triangles are community conversations. So that means all of those more quality conversations and dialogues we were having. The circles are community events, similar to the AJC block party, the kite festival, other large scale events where we were attending and tabling. And then the stars are actually our bus stop, train stop outreach. We made every effort and did attempt, I said we were going to attempt to evaluate where we were and where we were not going. We took time towards the very end of the 6-week period to do a quick review and see where are we missing. I think that the team actually did a really amazing job. And not even actually, we did do a really amazing job. That we could not see a place that we were really missing from a gap perspective in that moment. So I'm gonna say that. Now what you'll see is comments by zip code. So this is virtual open house data only. And we were trying to see where were the big conglomeration of comments being received based on zip codes in the area and along the alignment. And so you see a pretty consistent number of comments pretty much all through that central area. The lighter portions there that you see, I don't have a pointer, but along that green space right there, that's UT. And pretty much where the UT buildings are, which is why you see fewer comments. Those are buildings, not people. Demographic data. So these are data pools from the virtual open house only. And I will say that this is one of the areas where we know that we need to improve, because if you're only looking at virtual open house data and outreach, you can see the leaning towards more white, more male respondents. We know that from a engagement standpoint that we did do the work to get into priority populations. Where we need to improve upon is how we collect that demographic data as we keep going. It's always a challenge. It's voluntarily provided. We need better mechanisms when we go into meetings to have people self-identify in the spaces if they're willing to self-identify. I know in the past meeting, Dr. Karner suggested that we could do our own self-identifications. We're going to talk about what that looks like rather than implement it. It's going to go into our debrief as we keep going forward. And so for our next steps, we are taking this time right now because, and we're very grateful. So let's take a step back and say we're very grateful for all of the positive comments about the engagement that we've done. We are excited to use this as our jumping off point to continue and build upon it. We're taking the time right now for the rest of this month and into July as a team to do a full debrief and review of the process to understand what worked, where we can see improvements, and then bring that information back here for additional dialogue. And so using this as a starting point of that conversation, where could we improve? We know that we can improve in collecting demographic data that better represents the work that we did. We know that we can improve in the youth area. So we've heard that individuals under the age of 18 want to engage. How can we do that? We know that we can improve in our social media work. There's a lot of opportunity there where we can push harder on social media fronts. So those are some high level next steps. That's going to lead us into our short-term and long-term goals for community engagement, because we've been so focused on this moment in time. We need to know how now we scale that to be a broader picture of engagement as we keep going forward.
Appreciate that, Mr. Chavez. I'll open up to questions, comments, feedback.
You know, I couldn't see the numbers really good on that last graphic you had. And some of them were really, it's just really small and I'm far from it, but the blue lines at the bottom that were the longest, what were those?
So for demographics, gender and sexuality, the I'm a man category was 1,200, I am a woman was 670, and then gender non-conforming 42. I am an LGBTQ person 229. So to give you an idea of the breakdown.
Okay.
So the other one at the bottom looked at demographics by race and ethnicity. The largest group was a white person, followed by Chicano, Chicana, Latino, Latina, and then other, and then keeps going down.
And with the caveat that this is only for the virtual open house.
It's only for the virtual open house, and it's only for people who have self-identified. So that's not everyone who provided comment and not everyone who participated.
Right.
It's a very small subset.
And there are other things you just can't track. You know, so if you're at a bus stop doing outreach, you can't ask people for their demographics, or we had 157 email responses through the input email, and nobody provides their,
That's right.
I mean, half of them don't provide a phone number, or, you know, other than their email. And so it becomes really challenging. We've even done at events, like a tabletop sticker exercise, but then you have problems with autocorrelation where somebody says, you know, they're part of several categories. So you're like, oh, I'm Black and I'm a woman and I'm gay. And then you don't know, was that 3 separate people?
Right.
Or was that one person? And so you can't really say anything about that data. And so we're having trouble with in person versus virtual. And then even virtually, 60% of people will give you information at most. Normally it's 40. And it's because there's some lack of trust, or maybe it's a time commitment thing about not wanting to share that information because it's linked to their email. So even though we don't use the data that way, people are concerned that somebody could do a public information request and gather information.
Yeah, I have a brother who won't give you any demographics, but because he's afraid of that, but I was just wondering what the percentage is.
So Courtney, I'm sorry if you mentioned this, but it was the hit rate in terms of percentage of people that self-identified and gave us their information versus the total number of unique visitors.
I'd have to double check, but I believe it was around 40% for this engagement.
So 40% of the virtual open house, which is some subset of the total.
That's
So,
correct.
okay.
It's less than half of the total, so
Yeah, so
somewhere less than
between
20%.
20 and 40%.
I have a question. Do we track in any way how much prior knowledge about the project or about public transportation policy the attendants had. You know, if they had attended a previous ATP meeting before attending this one, like how engaged and involved were the people who attended our meetings, basically?
Well, so the one thing that we're capable of doing, and I'm not sure if we analyze it in this way, is to see people who are in our database already. So we could determine who was new and added versus people who were already there.
And do we have did we have that number? Or-
Well, we did track like new ads to our newsletter, for example, so we can see new, and we did that on a weekly basis. We do have that number. Did we ask questions about their knowledge or background, education? We did not ask that in this engagement, but we could going forward.
We did ask about their ridership behavior, so that way we
That's
could review responses using that filter, and that was helpful.
No, yeah, I mean, I think the ridership filter is crucial, and I think that data is really interesting. And also, and this might be just for future thought, I'm also curious as to whether there might be some very distinct patterns of difference around people who have attended multiple meetings, who follow the process versus people who are attending their first meeting for the first time.
I mean, anecdotally, potentially, because you could see a few people who actually submitted as the evolution of comments because they attended multiple meetings of I started here, then I heard more information, and now I'm here. Versus folks who, for example, people that when I did my own bus stop outreach and they didn't know about Project Connect and we're talking about it for the first time, their focus wasn't on anything we were talking about. It was on their personal experiences. So you're getting a real diversity of conversation around the topics that may impact because they weren't fully invested in what Project Connect is.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. That's kind of what I'm looking for. It's just the way that deeper information might change people's perspectives and the way they participate in our engagement processes.
So the demographics, I'm sorry, go ahead. Are you done?
Yeah, absolutely.
In the demographics that you showed us earlier, and you said it's not the full number of people that were involved, but how are you going to use this later? Are you going to use the smaller numbers as target groups, or?
We're still going to evaluate the entire process, looking at the demographic data of where we go next. We used it in the engagement report, at least for us to see a representation of what people were saying based on demographics. And so now, as we continue forward, we will see about who were we missing from a virtual open house perspective, and compare that to where we were from a zip code perspective and see how we can correlate some information and then determine whether we do have additional gaps in outreach. So there's a lot of analysis left to do to look back at what we did so that we can move forward.
Other folks with questions or comments? I know we've discussed this, I'll be honest, I think so. One of the things that we were recently having a conversation about was how do we collect demographic information from folks, and this is like years ago now. Oh my God. Guys, on the LGBTQ Quality of Life Commission, and we had been working with city law on collecting some of that sexual orientation, gender identity data. And at the time, the law department had essentially indicated that that can be part of a public information request. So, and that people's individualized demographic information could be shared. And so, of course, we as the, a commission where a lot of people are not out or are considering their own sort of personal safety, we just didn't feel comfortable putting that out there. So one of the things I've asked staff to do, and hopefully we can work on, is to figure out what is legally required that can be shared, just so that we can collect information in other ways. So that we're clear, because there's this challenge, like, self-identification. Some people just do not respond and do not wish to respond because of their own personal safety or inclinations. But at the same time, we would like to have more robust data so we know who we are engaging with. So it's a bit of a challenge, but I'm hoping that that's honestly something that we can continue to have conversations about on this committee.
Or what are the questions on whether or not they have a mobility impairment?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that honestly would be the perfect, right? Like any kind of disability, we would not want be able to have to share that publicly of. Because some folks might not wish to disclose that, and that's okay. We have to respect that.
Well, why do you have one leg, you know, kind of thing,
Yeah.
but I was just wondering if you did ask that question as well.
We do ask about mobility, we ask about age, income, ridership, transit frequency, housing, and then race, ethnicity, and gender and sexuality.
It winds up being clarifying for staff because then you know how to prioritize which external events and where to do your outreach. And even though you can't get demographics to prove it, you know, we know what we can gather from CapMetro what the demographics are of ridership generally, right? Or, you know, if you've got a lot of community events, you could be seeking out community events, trying to reach priority communities based on who's underrepresented in the virtual open house. And so that's really how it played out, where, you know, you start contacting you could either send a general APB out to every community organization and then just see who responds, or you could target specific community organizations because you know you're going to reach people who are missing. And that's how you wind up, you know, for example, like being at the School for the Deaf or Todos Juntos, because you prioritize reaching that community. So it's informative for us. It's less of a accountability. I mean, we're sharing it for accountability, but it's more to make our team better and continually responding to the community that we're reaching.
And one of our biggest achievements, I think, is in the relationships and the connections, because like, if you look at all of the events and the meetings that we held, only 2 of them were ATP hosted, and the rest were in partnership with other entities and organizations.
Right.
And so continuing that relationship building of making sure that we recognize that we're going to you, we're going to be in your spaces where you're comfortable having this conversation, and then building upon that as we keep moving.
And I just want to say that I really appreciate from a person with a disability that ATP, Project Connect, the CAC, all these groups that are working together have really worked hard to include people with disabilities into the work that they're doing. You know, they meet with the DAC and things like that. And I think that really means a lot to our community, because it isn't as easy for us to get out. But we do ride the bus probably more than as much as anybody else, but you know, so it's been really great to have you guys come in.
And I would honestly really highlight, you know, your community member Goris and Ms. Broadwater, all of y'all's honesty, feedback and guidance in this as well. We could not do it without y'all. So thank you. I know Dr. Gardner could not be here, and he had some sort of concerns and questions, and I'll just highlight some things and then ask the question on his behalf that I'm hoping. I think one was really, I think he was wanting to see more folks who sort of predominantly use transit. So I think one of his concerns was that, you know, as might have been expected in our community, our respondents use transit rarely or never. So how do we sort of increase that moving forward? You know, we already had a conversation about being more inclusive of BIPOC folks. And he also raised the issue of low number of responses from people who don't own vehicles, cars. I think that's, again, you know, considering our community, it's a challenging thing, but something to think about, how do we do better? And then also just how we relayed back information around the airport. I think he had some concerns. I cannot speak to detail, honestly, what he was thinking. One question that he had raised, I think it's worthy of sort of asking is, how was this information all taken and then used to shape the recommendation? What did that process look like? If y'all can walk us through that.
Sure, and Jen may be able to help me on this one a bit, because we utilize the engagement report in order to identify those key community values characteristics that we knew we needed to hit. So even when people were identifying maybe a preference for an alignment itself, we really had to dig in and understand, well, what about that alignment did you want? Was it based on ridership? Are your concerns related to elevated versus underground? And so that we could break it down and see how that builds into the analysis from a staff recommendation perspective. So once we could see the breakdown from that community values perspective and where we needed to reach, we handed that to the teams to now pull into how they were going to evaluate from a staff recommendation perspective with everything else.
But I think that's right, yeah, because you know, we were evaluating all these criteria, but you know, wanted to see if input cause us to amplify certain things more. And I think like the access to opportunities and creating jobs to lots of different neighborhoods, and the expandability of the system were among those priorities that we wanted to see reflected in the recommendation.
I know, because comments about the airport, people have questions about that. Well, their comments,
slow.
the comments themselves, sorry.
I mean,
keep
my
going,
bad.
I
I'm
keep
sorry.
going.
Fast, so I get it.
And so comments received really covered, they could cover 5 different themes in one comment, depending on how somebody submitted it. And so someone could actually say, we really need to get to the airport, but really we need ridership and you need to hit the most riders. And then I want to go to these 3 places. And so we had to break those comments down to understand, okay, what is the real focus of the comment? How do we break this into the larger picture? And so that's how it gets challenging, but
There's multiple comments in every
Yeah.
submittal.
every single,
Communication.
with the exception of a couple, which were just say, go here.
Yeah.
Other questions or comments that folks might have?
Just thank you. I mean, 90 events. And I mean, anyway, the work
Yes.
that the team did was really a lot. So,
We're still recovering.
yeah.
I will say, I think we were really, really gratified that people were so engaged, right? And I think that was really empowering and sort of energizing for us to be able to engage in so many conversations, and we learned a ton. You know, that really, I mean, having to respond to all those questions and get back to people helped to refine our thinking significantly. So, you know, I think we really saw the benefit of it. And hopefully, my hope is that it really, you know, lays the groundwork to keep that going, right? That it's not, this is obviously not the end. It's not the beginning either, but it's not the end. And then we just build on that and, you know, momentum and continue to build trust with our community and our stakeholders.
I also want to highlight a good work thumbs up from Mr. Gorse as well on this work, and I would sort of add to that. I certainly did not talk to every one of million Austinites, but I heard from a lot of people who did feel like this was a good engagement process. They felt like they were able to engage in it in an in-depth way, that their questions were answered. So I agree. Thank you all so much for your effort on this.
And I know people are really appreciative. I was in a Discord channel of a bunch of people, really youngins in Aura. I'm like feeling really old and having to get pick up. And anyway, so I just mostly watching, and sometimes they'd ask me a question. And they're like, we're gonna email these people. And I'm like, wow, they're really emailing a lot with the project team, you know, like I don't think it's that common when citizens are trying to draw up their own reports and recommendations that they can have such an open line to project staff. And so I think that was helpful to them and also helped build their confidence in what was going on as well. So thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the quality of the conversations we had, I thought was really productive, right? There wasn't a lot of like yelling or sniping, complaining, those sort of people wanting to get to the best outcome possible. And then how do we have a collaborative conversation about how to get there, right? Different opinions for sure, right, about what that looks like. But I mean, again, the quality of the conversations for the most part was very high and very positive.
Even in the conversations where entry into that discussion was a bit adversarial, you know, we could have dialogue and sit down and explain, let me understand what your concern is, and let's talk about it. And we have multiple examples of people saying they may not have been, you know, 100% on board, but understanding of where we are, why we're doing it, and moving away from that negative mindset into a more constructive and willing to work with us concept.
See if I can I just want to make a comment that I actually think that this engagement process is really good for us as an organization, like the ATP organization. It was really all hands on deck, and I'm thinking of the bus stop outreach in particular. I think every person in this building did that, whether you're in accounting or community outreach or whatever, the engineers,
the
executive, everybody was out at bus stops. And I just think to, you know, just communicate with people, you know, who some of them know what Project Connect is, and some of them have no idea what you're talking about. You know, it's really good. as an organization for us to be kind of close to the mission and the customers and being that have direct dialogue that way.
One request that I will make, it's a bit of a selfish request, which is I would love if y'all can give you in a summarized form, if you got a significant number of feedback on anti-displacement efforts. Just because we're not able to do this level of engagement on that question, but if something came up, we would love to know that because we're going to continue that work and making recommendations. So if there's anything that can inform that, or I'll be honest, anything that you heard from the service standards or whatever around sort of transit, that's also something this committee will be engaging in. So if there's a way to provide us with some information on things that do not necessarily relate to ADP's core function, but could help inform us since we provide feedback to all parties.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, I'm gonna move on to the next item, y'all, and thank you, staff. I don't know if we have any updates from our technical advisory committee delegates. I know some folks are missing for the day, some we might not actually have, but are there any technical advisory committee updates? And I think, yeah, if my memory serves me correct, all three of our delegates actually are not present at the moment. Same goes for the working group reports. I'll give updates on the two committees, the working groups that I'm in. So one is of course the design working group, or I guess I should say three. The design working group, wrapped up the work before that. We brought that. We have not met since then. We've been on pause. Same goes for the anti-displacement working group. We earlier in the spring did our recommendation on anti-displacement and then took a pause to get through this design work. So likely now we will start meeting again, regrouping, figuring out what is next for us. And as these sort of contracts get signed with the 14 organizations, we'll bring it back to the full committee. And then lastly, the governance working group I know had also been engaged in these conversations as we move forward, particularly I think around sort of the appointments, but also looking at board governance and some of that work that's going to happen through the fall. We will be engaged in that work as well. And the community engagement working group actually is right now getting really lean and thin because Ms. Snitchler, who was chairing it, has left the committee. So if folks are interested, I know some of you are on it, I'm on it. But I think if other people are interested, that one will have space as well. I don't know if there's some updates from any other. Not, we can go to future meetings and agenda items. So I guess I'll open it up. Do we have any requests for future agenda items? Yes.
Well, I just think this conversation about the process for the appointment or reappointment of new CAC members. Hearing loud and clear that we won't be making any official formal recommendations. I would love the idea for us to talk about hosting some kind of a space or creating some kind of platform where the community can articulate how it thinks or what it would like to see from a transparent CAC appointment process. And having lived through the first round of it, I can say it was not a transparent process. As an applicant, was not prepared for kinds of questions I was going to be asked when I was interviewed behind closed doors. It was a process lacking in much. So I hope that we can do better. And I believe there's a lot of smart people in this community that might have ideas on how we can do better.
I think that is a great point, and I'll work with staff, and I'll be honest, and might try to understand from staff. There's going to be some questions around sort of larger governance as well, including looking at the ADP board and maybe there's a way for us to maybe have a engagement on all of those things in a single space. So I'll work with staff to figure out what that looks like. So that's something I'll definitely do, and with also as a future agenda item, I'll make sure that staff comes here and sort of gets feedback from us as well, the teams who are working on this item specifically. Do we have any, sorry.
Do you have maybe it would be helpful too, do you kind of have a sense of what might be on our July agenda at this point? I know.
There's a list that exists I can go look at it. I think I'll tell you some of the big things that we have upcoming. One is sort of a long awaited conversation with CapMetro staff around sort of service and rapid service and how do we align that with rail and things like that, sort of an alignment of our system. That's a big conversation. We kind of paused it because of this. So now that we're past this, we have more clarity. I think that's a conversation that's coming up. A big piece that we do have is actually an update on the community initiated solutions grants and see, you know, what has been done because we were both, and Mr. Conley as well, we were on the committee that went through the applications. So apart from those 5 people, everyone else doesn't know what was in those applications. So that's a big presentation that we will be having so folks fully understand because they were great projects. It was exciting work. We want to make sure that everybody is aware of that. Those are some of the big things that come to mind. And then we do have a conversation on metrics. That's going to be coming. So key performance indicators and metrics. So that was something that was in some of the original, I can't remember the joint powers agreement.
It's the joint powers agreement.
So that work needs to come forward as well, and then governance. So
The one that I have been eager to hear more about too, it's not in any way urgent, so it could be September. I mean, is the red line, and I think that's probably in your doc of stuff, but
it is.
So.
And we might honestly, when we have the CapMetro staff come, we might make honestly efficient use of their time and do all things related. Red line, rapid, and sort of other issues around sort of that I think folks want to discuss. So maybe that honestly might be a good use of our July or August meetings. Any other future agenda items or points that folks have? So I will raise one or two things. I think one is we're still managing a little bit around technology, but there's some technological improvements that are happening in the room that we generally are in. Once that is complete, we'll be able to do hybrid more effectively. And so at that point, we will really open it up to anybody who wants to join in person. We'll sort of push for that. I'll be honest, this feels really nice to have more people in the room. I feel like it's been good. So that's one thing that'll be coming up in terms of how we do our future meetings. And then I would also say, as we go into sort of a conversation on future meetings, again, we are all sort of going to be holdovers until then. One of the things that has to be taken care of is we would have had regular elections, and we still will for our officers at the July meeting. So we are required to have new officers at our July meeting. Currently, we have one vacancy. Our secretary spot is vacant. And then I serve as chair and Ms. Lamanza serves as vice chair. So we will be coming back for that next month. If somebody's interested, let us know for sure. I guess through staff, please share with staff, not me, because I cannot discuss anything with you. But we should have that conversation. And I know there's been some conversation how we do it. We're fine with maybe doing a holdover until December, until everybody is seated, and then we continue. Again, conversations, but at least until December, we do need to have officer elections as well next month. Anything else that anybody wants to mention? If not, unless I hear otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn this meeting of the Project Connect Community Advisory Committee at 6:39 p.m. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Chair.